I'd like to call this meeting to order. I'd just like to let everyone know that the meeting is being recorded by Zoom and Dalton Community Television. Mr. Collins, would you please lead us in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Mr. Collins. Roll call.
We have Mike Stroud.
Here.
Robert Collins.
Here.
We have our Robert Bishop on Zoom.
I'm here.
Our chair, Dan Feld, and our town manager.
Here. Just clarify, Robert Bishop's attending remotely. I'll be stepping in as chair for the purposes of the meeting this evening as vice chair, as my role as vice chair. So this is the time for the public address the board. The time when the public may address the board on any item listed on the meeting agenda or on any issue or matter of the town. If you intend on addressing the board at this time, we ask that you please do the following. Identify yourself by name, address, the company or institution you represent. The public address to the board segment will last no longer than 30 minutes. Each individual will be given 3 minutes. Please make your comments concise and try not to repeat statements made by others. Please address your comments to the board chair. Discussion or debate on any issue may not take place at this time. The chair or their designee may answer questions on procedural matters. Please be cordial and respectful of others. If anyone wishes to be recognized when the board discusses an agenda item, please make the request at this time and address comments to the board chair. We're meeting in person and making this meeting available via Zoom for the convenience of the public. Since we are meeting in person, we will not be responsible for any technical difficulties, so if you'd like to be sure of participating, please try to attend in person. All right, any members of the public like to address any issue of the town or anything on the agenda?
Items 5 and 6, I'd like to make questions and comments.
Okay, thank you, Henry.
And if you can announce that the meeting is being recorded, and by DCTV.
I did at the
You
beginning.
did?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yes. Okay. So our first agenda item this evening is a presentation from Brian Humes, the architect, who is designing the public safety facility and presenting options to us this evening with the space needs assessment.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Just as a point of introduction, and I'm sorry I haven't my back to the audience. I hope they can hear okay.
Could consider turning table if it would be helpful for the audience members.
Okay. Well, maybe if you could just sit on this side.
Maybe sit on the side there. That would be great. Thank you.
I think it's a presentation both to the select board and to the audience that's here who's interested. I'm Brian Humes. I represent Chikunski Humes Architects. Our office location is Berlin, Connecticut. And I have been programming and designing police and public safety facilities for over 30 years. I just brought as a quick visual for you to see our activities in Connecticut and Massachusetts. That is our primary place of business. I'm a licensed architect both in Massachusetts and Connecticut. We have design facilities in 7 states, but you can see the majority of it is Connecticut and Massachusetts. I did see a report that I did the Williamstown facility. I did not do the Williamstown facility. In the Berkshires, we are currently doing the Lee Public Safety Facility in the town of Lee. That has passed a town vote, and that is in a design phase for bidding in the late spring. So that's the status of Lee. So I'm familiar with what Lee is doing. I've also been hired and have been working in Lanesboro for a number of years as they wrestle with the same question you wrestle with. We've done large facilities for large cities, and we've done small facilities for small communities. So the size of the community really doesn't dictate our interest in providing service. Our interest in providing service to Dalton is to bring some expertise to the community, to assist you in trying to find the right solution for your community, but also to help you understand what level of service you want to be providing to the community. The police department, whether it's in Dalton or any other community that you see on the map, they're all trying to provide a service to the community, and you need to determine what level of service that really wants to be. I have to design a facility according to a lot of codes and standards that are in place. But the state does not dictate what a minimum size needs to be, nor does the state dictate what a maximum size needs to be for a community of your size. These are local decisions that you need to determine on a case-by-case basis. And that is what the space needs assessment is attempting to do. I've visited your current facility, and after designing facilities for 30 years, I would hope that there were not existing conditions that still exist like I see in Dalton. You would think I'd be done with them all, and I've gone through the state, and I've made improvements to working conditions. So what I see at Dalton, unfortunately, there are facilities that are still out there that have substandard conditions, poor working conditions, and Dalton's one of them. I witnessed it while I was there doing the space needs assessment. But you're not alone. There are other communities that are still struggling with how to solve this, because you're dealing with a building type that the public is not familiar with the need of a police facility. And unfortunately, the constituency is not sometimes aware of why you even need a police facility. Why can't we just provide more cruisers, provide more cars? Why do they even need a building at all? And we face this challenge in this building type of trying to educate you as the decision makers, but also the public on what it is they do in a police facility. Why are there standards that pertain to the police facility? And what are the codes and standards that apply to right sizing a police facility? So all these things are, I understand that there's not a lot of knowledge in that regard whenever we're coming into a community. We know there's a need. You go to the facility, we understand the need. But there's never been an answer as to how many square feet do you need. And I'm trying to put a number on that. And the process that we go through is called the space needs assessment. And that's what you see. And that's what we created. It's dated January 2025. So this document is now 4 weeks old. But it's a working document. One of the things that attracted me to Dalton's request for proposals we always review the RFP to determine whether we're interested in getting involved in this community or whether we're going to pass and give this opportunity to another designer. One of the things that attracted us to Dalton was the way the request for proposal was formatted by the building committee. They had an understanding of the process that municipalities typically take to put together a package of information that they could then go to the public with, and they typically would call that a pre-referendum service. We recommend the same process that the building committee was dictating in the RFP. First and foremost, you have to establish a space needs assessment to determine square footage. Then and only then could we then apply this document to sites or site where you could place, construct, renovate, or apply this for a site to come up with a solution. So that's the second aspect that was in the RFP that we were to follow. First, the space needs assessment, and only then to look at sites. Once a site has been determined as favorable, then the next step would be floor plans to a schematic level to understand the adjacencies and how a floor plan would be applied to a certain site. And then the fourth function would be a professional cost estimate to determine, now that we have a size and a site and a floor plan solution, what's the ultimate cost for this solution to go to the townspeople, and back to you as the select board. While the cost estimate is the final piece, we can easily apply costs, though, at any point along the way, because we could give you an estimate for what this says, for instance, as far as just a cost per square foot. It's not an accurate cost estimate, but we can get you in the range. We get asked a lot of times to come into a community and say, would this site work? If that's what the RFP was asking, we would have had probably a hard time answering that, and we would probably have passed on the RFP. Because we don't know what sites can support it until we know what the space needs are. So we call these the puzzle pieces. We need to develop puzzle pieces. Now, how do we go about the process of determining what these puzzle pieces are so we can ultimately put together the puzzle? Well, we don't do this in a vacuum. The way we've conducted the space needs assessment is the way we've conducted all of the space needs assessments for all of the patches that you see on boards. We sit with the department. We interview the department. We talk with personnel, and we listen and take copious notes on where the department feels it's going in the future, where it's been in the past. We ask about personnel and personnel growth. We ask about vehicles and future vehicles. We want to know what the next 20 years is going to look like for the Dalton Police Department. But we also look at what the last 20 years has looked like for the Dalton Police Department. So we take that information of 20 years ago, 10 years ago, current status, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And yes, sometimes it's difficult to really define a 20-year growth potential. But the reason that we ask the department to engage us in this conversation is because typically these municipal projects are bonded for at least 20 years. We don't want you as a community to be hearing that the facility is not adequate, overcrowded, not serving the needs, needing an addition, needing renovations. You don't want to hear about anything for 20 years because you're still paying off the bonds, typically. So that is one of the reasons that we asked for a 20-year projection, to try to right-size the facility for tomorrow and tomorrow's tomorrow, to know that at least while you're paying this off, you're not experiencing any of the conditions that may be hampering the performance of the department. If you don't build in something for that 20-year growth, what we found is departments are reverting back to what's happening currently in the department, and spaces that were not designed for a function are needing to be utilized for something that it wasn't designed for. Yeah. So, for instance, you go to the police department currently, there are storage rooms being used for offices. That's just because they're doing the best they can with the space that they have. They don't have space that's designed for that function, so they're doing the best they can. We want this facility to function and function properly. The other thing that's interesting about designing a police facility is each space is designed pretty much for a specific function. And those specific functions want to have adjacencies to each other to function properly and function efficiently. Because they're so specific to the function, it's not that we can build a facility and just say we'll add 2,000 square feet in the future for any growth that may come along, because then that won't be efficiently located within the overall structure. You want administration to be all together. You want all your dispatch functions to be adjacent. So you can't think of a facility as though it's a school where if you have more kids, you just add classrooms. These are specific functions within the department that they really rely on needing. Now, we are also challenged by things such as accreditation standards, codes, Department of Health requirements. These are items that we need to be aware of within the design of the facility so it can assist the community in meeting those standards. Accreditation is something that every department strives for. It's a mark of accreditation, it's a mark of excellence within your community or within your region. It's definitely within the state, and there's state and national accreditation standards for police facilities. Those accreditation standards are typically performance-based, meaning that the department has to set up procedures on how to do things a certain way. If the department needs to do certain things in a certain way, they need a building that supports that. If you build this facility, does that mean you're accredited? No. If you build a facility that supports accreditation, then the department has the ability to enact the procedures the way they're supposed to perform within the department, and the building supports accreditation standards. It doesn't give you accreditation. So I hope that's just something that you should probably be aware of. Seeking accreditation is something that departments will be striving for, and in Connecticut, it's now a state statute that they seek accreditation. But the department right now really has their hands tied because the facility doesn't adequately support the procedural requirements that are in place that they need to adhere to. Again, they're doing the best they can in the situation that they're in. Some of the requirements and statutes that are in place in the state of Massachusetts are specific to square footage. Department of Health mandates that if you have a detention cell, it has to be of a minimum size. We don't have an ability to change that procedure. We need to conform to Department of Health standards if you have detention cells. But the state doesn't say how many detention cells you need. If you provide a detention cell, it has to be of a certain size and certain requirement. Your current detention cells are nowhere near meeting those standards. For a list of reasons, they're not in compliance, and every year the state comes in and the state inspects and the state sends the police department their rejection letter. So this is something that is happening and will be happening until you have an ability to right-size that and fix it for a lot of concerns that the state has with liability. A police facility in general is one of your biggest liabilities in your community. Whenever you detain somebody and have life situations in place, there's an extreme liability to how the town has concerns for their own liability and the concerns of the person that's incarcerated and the concerns for the safety of the officers that are handling those cases. So all of that liability is present. It's present in your current facility. We're trying to minimize those liabilities and increase officer safety and officer security and officer wellness with this new facility. So I've talked a lot about kind of procedure and what we need to apply when we're going through this process. But I had the ability to sit with the department, to listen to the department, and talk to them about how they see this facility operating, how they see it functioning, how they see it supporting personnel, how they see it supporting detainees, dispatch, evidence, and all of the requirements that we talked about are stipulated in this space needs assessment. I never asked the department once, how many square feet do you need? That's never a question that I asked. The only things I asked were, what are the needs within the department? And if we start on page 5, you see them outlined. We started with public functions. What do you see the need? You see the need for a vestibule. And if you see the need for a vestibule, why? What's the function of a vestibule? Well, in this instance, the building could be vacant at night. Are you going to allow the public to walk through the vestibule, walk into your public lobby, and find that there's no one there but the dispatcher? Are you going to allow the public to come into your vestibule 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365? We need to have those conversations about what's going to happen for public service as they come into a vestibule or they come into a lobby. Who are they going to meet? What are the functions you need within the lobby? Those are the questions that I asked the police department. What are these going to be functioning as and performing for you? Vestibule, lobby, public toilet rooms. Do we need public toilet rooms? There's nothing in the code that says we need to provide public access toilets to the public coming to a police department. It's for staff. Staff toilets are required. There's nothing that says I need to provide any toilets for the public. But there's also an interest in providing a training classroom and a meeting room, which could double as an emergency operations center and could have community access to their police training area for any need in the community to use that room, such as this room. The primary function of that space and we sized that room at 40. Again, why? What's the need for 40? Well, the need for 40 is, one, you need a training classroom to accommodate your entire department and have them collectively gather in one space for training. But your department's not projected to be 40. Well, why 40? Within Massachusetts, if you want to host training in your facility and you want to host a training session in Dalton, to be a regional training site, you need a minimum seats of 40. If you now have a training classroom that seats 40, you can be eligible as a regional training site and your department gets seats at no cost. Okay, that's one reason for 40. Police departments are always going for training. Training is part of their work description. If they were to go to training to another community, that means that officer would be outside of your jurisdiction, off at training. So does the department have to backfeed that for staffing levels if that person's off for training? Or if that person could be at training in your training classroom and you're a regional site, you're not having to pay for that person to go to training. They could be at your facility and get a seat for free. You can see how the conversation goes But we're not saying what's right and what's wrong. We're giving you reasons why 40 may be appropriate for that room. And it may make sense to maintain that at 40. But there's no right and wrong. If you say, no, let's make it 30, we make it 30. But you have to understand that then you're no longer a candidate for a regional site. And for your department to get training, they would have to go outside your jurisdiction. We don't know how far they'd have to travel, but they wouldn't be in Dalton. So those are the decisions that we had to have some conclusion to when we're going through this process, because I'm not coming into town and saying you need 40. But if you have 40 and you have it as a training classroom for the department and you're inviting outside agencies to come in or use it for community use, well, now you do have to provide bathrooms for the public off the lobby. That's the conversation that we have. And we try to make this in your best interest. And if that is the stated request, that we try to do that in the best interest of the department, I and I alone put the square footage on that space. I don't ask the department, if it's a 40 classroom, how many square feet do you need? That's not the police department's answer. It's my answer. If we're going to design a facility for 40 people in a training classroom, it's 800 square feet on a space needs assessment. That's because I have to design these facilities to meet codes, meet occupancy requirements. It's 40 people, it's 800 square feet. That's where I bring the expertise and the understanding of an architect who's done police facilities to the document. Do you need furniture storage? Do you need furniture storage? You don't need it, but it would be awful nice to have. If this training classroom, you could move the tables and chairs out, then you could use that space for defensive tactic training. You could use that space for other CPR trainings. You need floor space. We added 50 square feet for furniture storage. If you say, we don't want it, I take the 50 square feet off. But if you're going to build the room, do you think it's prudent to have a space, well, probably similar to that back space that you have in here, where you could put the furniture away if you needed to take the space that way? We're not saying you need this, but we're trying to say, if you're going to build it, what are you going to build? We understand there's cost to all of this. And the cost, none of these communities that we're working in can avoid cost. You can get assistance, you can get certain grants. But there's very few facilities that I've done that are completely paid for without local support. There are some, but very few without local financial support from your citizens. There's no reimbursement in place through the state for such as schools where they have a reimbursement program. Doesn't exist for police facilities within the state. So as we went through the document, I just gave you a kind of a lengthy concept of how public and training classroom are. I don't know if you want me to go through this. Maybe I'll just go through quickly.
Sure.
I don't want to spend too much of your time if you have questions, but we have an interview space. There's an interview room and a public permitting room. Again, interview room. If I'm talking, and I just had recently explained accreditation standards. If your department wants to go for local or national accreditation, accreditation requirements state that you should have 3 independent and separate interview spaces within your facility. 3. Doesn't matter if you're Dalton, or doesn't matter if you're Boston. 3. If you want to do it with 2, you can do it with 2. But that's going to really affect whether your department can go for accreditation. So I'm just pointing these things out. Do we do it with accreditation in mind or not? This interview room is off the lobby, so that can act as one. Why is it off the lobby? Because it can double as a permitting room. So if anybody is coming in for permits, gun permit, pistol permit, they can be handled off the lobby, and then they could be asked to go on their way. It's a convenient way for the department to handle public requests for permitting without having to bring public back into a prisoner processing area where there could be detainees in proximity to you having to be permitted for just a personal permitting use. We're trying to reduce liabilities. So having the public going into prisoner processing areas where they can't predict who may be coming through a Salad Port entrance is not a good situation. It's not good for the officers, it's not good for the public. And we're trying to provide that minimum of 3. So off the public lobby is 1. Off the detective bureau, we have the second one. And off of prisoner processing, we have the third. That's within the document. 80 square feet for a processing interview room, an 8 by 10 room is all you would need to be active. Communications dispatch center. It's a dispatch center, it's a communication supervisor's office, a restroom, a kitchenette. These are self-contained areas for the purposes of emergency response, emergency communications. A lot of times you just have one person in that space, and that one person can't leave that post to go down the hall to the restroom. If somebody's calling 911 for assistance, you have to have a qualified person on your desk to answer 911 calls. If there's only one person in the building qualified to do that, how do they go to the restroom? Yes, we put radio communications connections into that restroom. So if they're in the restroom, the 911 calls, they still have the ability to answer that call. That's the requirement of they call them PSAPs, public safety answering position. You have currently one console and a backup consulate, and that backup is for emergency use. If there's a storm, if there's something that happens, you need to drop 2. You need to put 2 people onto that communications to handle an event. You have the ability for 2. We also talked about future expansion into future regionalization of the department. So we're recommending 2 active positions, expandable to a 3rd, to support a regional response center. This is one area where the state has and can provide some financial assistance. If you're a regional PSAP, and a PSAP is just, think about if you call 911, who answers it? Whoever answers it, that's the PSAP. It's public safety answering position. The state of Massachusetts has PSAPs throughout the state, and the state provides that information to the community in support of that PSAP. They give a lot of equipment over to make sure you have the ability to answer 911 calls. And all of the PSAPs around the state are connected with a fiber link. So if your Dalton facility goes down for any reason, storm, natural disaster, the fiber links roll over to the next nearest or regional PSAP. So there's always an answering position for 911 somewhere in the state. Right now you have one in your town. But if you were to regionalize, you have to think about taking 2 PSAPs and making them 1, or 3 PSAPs and making them 1. Now the state can reduce the amount of equipment in these other locations, and they only have to provide equipment to use at your PSAP. Because it's reducing equipment loads and fiber loads on the state, they actually support and are promoting a regional approach so they can reduce the number of PSAPs within the state. I forget the number in Massachusetts, but if you compare Massachusetts to Vermont, I think Vermont has a total of 3, and they handle the whole state. Massachusetts might have 100 and some. So the state is trying to reduce its equipment loads. So a regionalization would mean either somebody comes to you or you go to somewhere else. If your PSAP was to go somewhere else, that's the answering position. If you were walking the lobby, that's the person who would greet you. So if that person's not there, who's there to greet you? And they call these dark stations. Some municipalities have dark stations at night. That means no one's in the building, they're out on patrol, and no one's there to actually handle a walk-in if there's no dispatcher or nobody there. They don't typically staff that position because it's not wise to just have somebody sitting in the apartment when they could be out on patrol. So you have to think about this as far as it's a benefit to you as a community to have a PSAP come down. It gives you your dispatcher in your community. That dispatcher could be in another town, in another region, not in your community. But you have a benefit, in my opinion, that they are in your community. And they are people you know, and these dispatchers do a great job in what they need to do in emergency or just normal course of business. They're doing it in your community. So you have to think about that as far as what do we do? Do we outsource our communications to another regional center, lose that PSAP location, give it up? The state wants you to. Give it up, regionalize somewhere else, or make it so you could be an attractive place to entice somebody to come to you. And then you have control of that PSAP stuff. So that's why in dispatch we talked about 2. 2 is what you currently have. Expanding to 3 would give your facility some ability to attract others. Whether that happens or not, that gets back to where I started, of did we right-size the facility? Well, if you don't have the space for the third console, you can't attract an outside agency to try to reduce that PSAP load across the region. So this dispatch center is its self-contained area. It does have its own restroom. It does have its own kitchenette. That person can't leave while they're on shift. They have to stay in that area. So it's a self-contained space. A records clerk. A records clerk is to relieve some of the work of the current executive assistant. Currently, the executive assistant handles records requests and assists the administration. We see a future need for those not to be one person, but to be 2. And again, this is not a management study, this is a space needs assessment. If and when that happens, do you have the space at the right place in the facility to accommodate that? Well, if it's a records clerk, that space needs to be adjacent to the lobby. It can't be off somewhere in the department. It's another way for public to come in and request a record and get service from the department. It's another, but that records clerk typically is only there 9 to 5. It's not a 24-hour position, it's 9 to 5. That's typically when the public would come in and request a record. Records filing is, again, accreditation requirements. Some files have to be kept forever. Some files can get purged, but the way the state mandates how records need to be retained is very specific for a police facility, very strict on what can and cannot be discarded. Administration, there's really no change in administrative positions here. It's a chief, it's a lieutenant, it's an executive assistant, We're providing a conference space, office supplies, and restroom shower for administration. You're asking about what's needed there. Well, space is needed for staff. The restroom shower, that has been put into the space needs assessment. For the administration to have a place to utilize for showering and restroom versus we do have locker rooms in here. In a facility like this, the locker rooms are typically for unionized employees. The administration is not. So we're trying to accommodate both union requirements and non-union. The investigative and detective bureau, you have that now. That includes a space for the detective bureau to have office space. It's the second interview room that I talked about. It's off of detectives. But this interview room, the one I mentioned off the public, has an interview function and it also has the ability to do permitting. The one off the detective bureau, it's an interview space, but it's also designed that you could have youth being held at the facility until somebody comes and retrieves that youth. Police facilities, and the chief can go on and tell you about all the requirements that they have to accommodate for youthful offenders. And for youthful offenders, yes, they have to be understanding of why they're there. They might have made a bad decision, but you can't put them in a detention cell. You have to be respectful of their youth. It's not somebody who's just a teen. It could be any age. And we cannot put them into a detention cell. You need to, for better word, you need to babysit them until somebody comes and picks them up. So do we want to babysit them next to your desk? Do we want to put them in where do they, you can't put them in the dispatch center. Where do you put them? So this space is for juvenile waiting, but also juvenile interviewing. It's a whole different scenario. Your department is only as good as the facility you give them to perform that task of, we may need to interview somebody who's very sensitive and could be a youth, could be a child who witnessed something. And you do not treat them like they're coming in from personal processing, or you don't want to do it off the lobby. You have to be really understanding of the situations. Detective bureaus would have that ability to perform that task in this juvenile interview, juvenile waiting space. That's why it's there. The 100 square feet, 10 by 10 latitude of square footage. So they could probably perform that task of handling, interviewing, and holding a juvenile. Notice I didn't say youthful offender. They might not have offended anyone. They're just needed by the department for information. A general office, 175 square feet for 2 workstations, professional development, special assignments, outside agencies. It's a general space. Professional development is accreditation. If the department wants to seek accreditation, they will be assigning that task to an officer to perform that function of accreditation. It's a process. So they need a space to work through that process. Special assignments, they could utilize a second desk. Or if there's something that happens where outside agencies are involved, outside agencies could be FBI, could be other federal bureaus, it could be state police, it could be neighboring police departments. If there's a case that they're working on and they need to engage somebody from another agency, where do they put them? oh, give up your desk. Chief will give up the desk. They need to work, take over a conference room. Yeah. If we have the conversation, we just put a workstation there for that purpose of an outside agency having a space. School resource officers, you engage school resource officers, you have engaged school resource officers. They have space in schools, but the schools aren't open all through the year. So they have a place in the department where they can be where the school is not in session. Animal control officer, a space for that. You currently have one, 100 square feet. Quiet room, lactation room. This is a requirement that we build into these facilities for the purposes of lactation room. The police departments have used that space, and for a lactation room, it has to have certain requirements. It has to have refrigeration, it has to have a sink. But it's 60 square feet. It's not a big space. 60 square feet for the purposes of that. But we also call it quiet room. A quiet room / lactation room. So we're trying to put dual functions as much as we can into single spaces. The quiet room. I should spend a little bit of time on the quiet room because this is becoming more of a request. Lactation room is a requirement, but the quiet room is becoming more and more of a request. And this has to do with officer wellness. I'm really passionate about police facilities and public safety and the tasks that these personnel do for your community. But whether you're a dispatcher or a police officer, you could be put into a very stressful condition. And in the past, if you had a stressful condition, if you're a dispatcher who takes a very stressful call, in the past, the answer has been, just go home, take care, come back tomorrow. And with current studies in officer safety and officer wellness, that's not the right answer. The right answer is find a place in the department that could still be there, deal with the stressful situation, have the department bring in anybody that could assist in that if they needed any assistance. But the answer to just send them home is the wrong answer. They're still on duty. They still have a task. They're still your employee. You're still responsible for them, and you're still responsible for their wellness. So there's 60 square feet in here that you have the ability to make sure that person is not sent home and not cared for appropriately. And that's what the quiet room is. The space for them to have quiet. But it's a space for them, for the department to understand that there's a need for that officer's wellness. Or, I just said officer wellness, it could be a dispatcher, it could be any situation. But you don't know when you're gonna need that, but departments are asking us to put that into our plans right now for that purpose. Patrol functions, that's the biggest square footage of any department. Patrol functions, it's kind of a broad brush, but it handles the majority of your staff. It's sergeants' areas, it's patrol rooms, it's report writing, it's lunchroom, day room, it's locker rooms, it's a physical training room, it's patrol storage, honor guard storage. All these are pertaining to the patrol functions and the patrol needs of a typical patrol officer. These are the officers that come to work and go on a shift. They come in and they need to have some sort of roll call, some sort of information session. They have to write reports on every incident that they are assigned to. And those reports sometimes are done once they come back from shift, and they might have to stay a little longer to write a report, come in early to write a report. But if there's an incident that happens, typically the public are the ones that say, can I get the police report? Well, they have a duty to write these reports, and they have a duty to get them done as soon as possible. And you as the public are going to be asking for these reports for whatever purpose you need them for, but they need a place to write that report. So that's part of the patrol function. Locker rooms, the patrol department lives out of these locker rooms. Everything they have for uniforms and supplies and boots and vests and every piece of gear that they're assigned has to get into a locker. These lockers are also equipped with power and ventilation. You might think it's really future thinking, but we've been putting power and ventilation into lockers for the last 20 years. The ventilation helps because in the summertime, if that patrol officer comes off the street, hot, sweaty, body armor, they take that wet body armor, they put it in their locker, they come back the next day, open their locker, and it's still wet and musty and damp, and they have to put it back on again and go out and do. It just doesn't make for a good situation. The ventilation actually dries the equipment in the locker so they can have a proper uniform to put on the next day. The power, they're assigned things that need to get recharged. They're assigned these pieces of equipment, they put them in their locker and they can recharge within their locker. These are just typical things that we're doing for all these facilities, these standard operating procedures now for police facilities for this type of locker. I put the square footage again on the requirement because we had a male locker room for 20 and a female locker room for 7. Why 7 in the female? We don't have 7 officers right now. Well, this is where you're building from today or you're building for the future. Or what's the number? We can debate a number all night. The state of Massachusetts is attempting to get police facilities up to a female strength of 30% by 2030. There's my calculation. Police departments are seeing more and more female officers who are applying for the position of police officers. You need to give them a space that's equivalent. Whether it's a male or female, they should have equivalent accommodations. So yes, 27 female officers is a good planning tool for Dalton's future with 20 male. Physical training room. You don't need to provide. But if you're promoting officer wellness, the physical training room is typically used before shift or after shift. Some departments contribute to an officer being part of a gym or a fitness club. But you want to promote somehow officer wellness. You want a fit department. You want a department that's proficient in firearms. These are all helping the department and in turn helping the community. And having a place for officers to have a fitness program and know they don't use it during their shift. But if these officers are coming in on their off hours, they're in the building. If they're staying late, they're in the building. Some departments open up these fitness centers to retired officers. It now gives the ability for the current staff to intermingle with past staff. It's a morale. It's an information gathering. It's something that helps the department grow as a department. Can you eliminate it? Yes. That's your decision. Your decision can say, we're not going to provide it. It would eliminate 275 square feet out of the space needs assessment, and we can get rid of it. But are you providing an alternative, or are you providing another way to promote officer fitness and officer wellness? That's a question. A PBA union office, 80 square feet. Now we're getting into Sally Port's prisoner processing and detention. You as a community are required to detain prisoners. If you're going to be detaining prisoners, this is a huge liability, and it's a liability you can't avoid, but it's a liability you can very well manage. Knock on wood, I have not had a suicide in any of my facilities in the last 30 years. It's because it's a liability that can be managed. It's a liability that the state mandates right now to the Department of Health, that if you are to build a cell, you must comply with these like 25 requirements of the cell. The state tells me that they have to put water into the cell, and hot water, and it has to be between 120 and 130 degrees. I don't have flexibility on that. If I don't provide that water at that temperature, you don't pass the requirements for the detention cell. So what I need to provide into a cell is given to me by the state. The department has the obligation to detain. Now, the obligation for the department is to detain males or females, or sometimes youth. Sometimes. We need to maintain sight and sound separation between these areas of detainment. So you can't put two cells next to each other like you currently have in your apartment and say, a female's going to go in that one and a male's going in that one. You have two detention cells now that have no sight and sound separation between them at all. So you are limited now to you can only detain a male or a female or a youth. If you have any of those three within your cells, you cannot then process somebody of an opposite sex, because they have sight and sound, where there's no sight and sound separation. So the state is mandating this. So what we've built into the space needs assessment are 3 detention cells, all sight and sound separated. So you have the ability to now house 3 different sex, age combinations. And your sight and sound separated from the prisoner processing area, so you can continue to process somebody of any sex, any age, while the detention cells may have occupancy. Again, it's something that's dictated, but we're trying to manage liabilities, and we're trying to maintain officer safety. So 3 detention cells was the conversation that I had with the department. And that was the reason. You can eliminate 1 or 2 of these if you want. But then you're back to, I may be detaining a male. Where does the female go if I need to detain a female? That means they would have to then find an alternative location somewhere in the region for that female to go. And your department is still responsible for that person, so the department has to send somebody with them. They have to feed them, they have to look after their well-being in another location, which is not your town. So they could go to Berkshire County and we'll go there. But you can't drive them over there, open the door, say, here you go, and drive away. They will. Won't happen, can't happen. You need to stay there. So you need to bring in somebody from overtime or somebody to staff that person somewhere else.
Regional lockup here.
Well, you don't have a regional line.
They don't speak regional.
You need to find somewhere to solve this problem.
Yeah.
So that's why there's 3. If you're at why do we need these? I'm just trying to give some perspective.
Very helpful. Yeah, please continue.
The Sally Port is a way for prisoners to be transported to the department. You might not be familiar with the Sally Port term. A Sally Port is a glorified garage. But that garage is an enclosed space for a vehicle to come in, garage doors to come down. And the officer now has a safe way to transport the prisoner from the car into the prisoner processing area without the risk of flight for that happening, or inclement weather, or something, slip and fall on ice. Managing liabilities is what we're doing. A sally port. Do you need a sally port? No. Is it prudent? Yes. If you don't have a sally port, I've just explained something that could happen, and these things are what the police department are dealing with currently. They don't have a sally ports. But they are having to bring detainees through the front door, mix that with public population that could be in the lobby, walk them past the dispatch center into the facility, mixing with all of the staff that may be in there, with officers with firearms. It's just a terrible liability. You just think this out and you're not going to sleep well. This way, a sally port, officers secure their weapons before they even take the detainee out of the car. There's no possibility for that detainee to overtake somebody who has a weapon on them. The weapons are stored. Weapons are not allowed in prisoner processing areas because you're managing that liability. So yes, officers take their firearms off, they put them in a secure locker, they lock that firearm, then they take the detainee from the car into prisoner processing without the risk of flight, without the risk of slip and falls. Processing happens in a secure booking area. We have to fingerprint, we have to take photos. Not all prisoners go into a detention cell. That's a fallacy. That's the movement. The majority of them don't go into a detention cell, but they have to be processed. If it's determined that they go to a detention cell, then you have the appropriate way to hold and detain. But not everybody ends up in a detention cell. You could be released once they have your information. They could be bailed out without having to get to a detention cell. But there's a process that the police department have to follow and have to manage. And this is all making sure that they're following procedures, because the other entity that's out there making sure that there may be a loophole is the legal system. The officers are always up against the legal system, forcing the issue of did you do it properly. And this leads to the next aspect of evidence and property. Not only do you have to handle your prisoners or detainees in a certain way to make sure the legal system makes sure that you don't have loopholes in that process, where you could then have the police department doing the best job possible with what they have to work from, but the legal system has found a way to release that person because you didn't properly dot an I or cross the T. This is true for evidence. Anything that's brought into your facility as evidence has to be handled a certain way, or the legal system will put that whole case in jeopardy. Who had access to that evidence? Where was that evidence placed? Where did that evidence get stored? You might have just seen the department in the South, where they wanted to span the entire department because the entire department had access to the evidence. They didn't follow the procedures properly. There was a masonry enclosure for the evidence room, and they had removed a cement block from the wall. Dispatcher had access through that masonry hole to reach into the evidence, retrieve evidence, and there was a dispatcher that did it, and they overdosed and died in the department. They're disbanding the entire department because evidence. That's how serious this is for evidence to be handled, processed, and there's not only a requirement to store evidence, certain evidence has to be double locked. Firearms, valuables, ammunition, double locked. What's the procedure for that? Well, we built that into all of the requirements for evidence and processing within this space needs assessment. And then we really get to mechanical space, toilets, and computer data, an armory, and an area for the department to do gun cleaning, firearm proficiency, very important, keeping those firearms working. We have nothing in here for firearms training. But as far as live fire training, there is a requirement that they do it. This facility does not accommodate that within the department.
How much space is needed for something like that?
If you're going to do a live fire range, it's about 2,800 square feet and about $2.5 million. But what the training classroom does is provide a space for visual firearms training and visual training and defensive tactics training. If they have the space, a lot of your firearms training right now is gone virtual and it's gone goggles. Real live training with not live fire, video training, video trainings. You can do real life scenarios through goggles. They can do virtual training in real situations such as this senior center. You could put together a scenario with a video walking through this senior center, and you can replicate different scenarios within this senior center. So they might have to do a fire, no fire scenario. And they could do all that training with goggles. So the training classroom, there's another reason, to give them space to do that type of training, not just classroom training, but firearms proficiency training, more of a virtual, video-related training. But nothing's in here as for live fire. So when I talked through all the spaces, I did conclude 13,350 square feet provides you the department that I just described. We have in our contract that we are not going to go to the next phase until this document is endorsed. The next phase is site. It doesn't make sense for me to look at sites if you're not going to build 13,350 square feet. It's only going to make sense if I look at a site knowing that these are the puzzle pieces that you want to put on that site. If half of these puzzle pieces go away, one will have a hard time trying to figure out how the department's going to function the way I just described it. But if any of these puzzle pieces go away, that's going to affect whether the site's going to accommodate that. So I specifically put in my contract, don't waste your money having me go in advance only for you to say, well, why did you do all that work and charge us for all that? That's not what we wanted you to draw. I want to know what it is you want me to draw. If it's not this, let's continue with this. Let's continue working this until everybody understands it and says, that's the facility that Dalton needs to provide. Those are the services that Dalton wants to support. Those are the personnel that Dalton wants to have within their facility for a 20-year projection. Now we know the puzzle pieces. Send me off to look at sites. We'll come back, and then you have to give me an approval again to do schematic design. The way we're seeing this facility right now, and I just did a cost estimate for Lanesboro and developed their cost estimate. These facilities are not cheap. Unfortunately, the cost of these facilities are about $650 a square foot to provide what we need to provide in the way we need to provide it. And then that's just for the hard cost. That's just the cost of the building. If there's site acquisition, that has to be on top of that. If there's soft costs,
Furnishings.
soft costs, furnishings, fees, that's an addition to that. There's a project contingency that you typically want to put on top of that. So it could be the cost of the building with another 30% added to it. So I want everybody to go into this with eyes wide open. But I want to also understand that, yeah, it's a tremendous financial commitment on any community that we go into that says, are we doing this right? Are we providing this for the services that we're expecting of the department in a way that the community is feeling that it's appropriate? There is always a desire to make these facilities small. You have some potential here to make this small. And I think we can continue a conversation to say, then where is that in this document that we're going to target that? Are we going to take away the 40-person classroom? Are we going to take away just a couple cells, and the cells are 60 square feet? Are we going to limit the department with only one detention cell versus 3? Are we going to reduce the number of individuals below 3 if we're going to get into accreditation standard requirements? That's a healthy dialogue. And I think that I've given you some background in why it says what it says. I'm ready to take questions, or if there's,
Yeah.
or they want me to continue to, I've talked for an hour now.
Yeah.
Might as well
Well,
hand it back to
this
you.
has been incredibly informative. It's really opened my eyes to the needs of our town and the amount of space that it requires to provide for public safety, the safety of officers, safety of detainees, as well as setting our eyes for the future, growth of the department, and potential for regionalization, as well as becoming a regional training hub, or at least a space that could be used for that function. Frankly, when I first saw this, I thought, how can we make it smaller? Same question you asked. It was solely based on cost to the taxpayers. But I think if we're creative in terms of funding sources and try to tap public grant opportunities that might be available, as well as longer term, bonding, I think there's an absolute critical need to build a new facility. And so I'd open the floor up for the board to ask questions first, and then maybe we could hear from the chief of police, as well as any members of the committee, the Space Needs Committee or the Building Committee, to speak or ask questions.
One of the things that the RFP pointed out, do you have any alternative designs for this building?
Again, I haven't designed anything other than 8.5 by 11.
Right.
I have a lot of designs. If you look on the board, I've designed a lot of police facilities.
Right.
There are very few facilities that I could pick up, move to Dalton,
And so
put down, and say, it matches this entirely. There's something that's going to be unique about your facility that's going to make any other facility that I try to pick up and move and put down maybe not appropriate for Dalton.
Yeah.
I did convey to the building committee that the one that I felt was the closest to this
Yeah.
was one that we recently completed in Carver, Massachusetts. It was about 12,000 square feet. It reads very similar to Dalton. Carver is a community of 11,800 people. That was their conclusion for Carver, that their space needs assessment concluded a very similar read to this one. Though it was recently constructed, again, I offered it as someplace to visit, but if you visit, I'm sure you'd go through it and say, we like it, but we might do this a little different, or we might do that a little different. So I haven't designed anything for specific. I don't have a site to put this on yet, and I just have a description of my puzzle pieces.
Now, in the RFP, there was also a design scenario for capital cost to bring the existing building, if possible, up to grade.
Yes.
Have you done any of that, or is there where's that stand?
The way that stands is within my contract, and the understanding of the building committee is I have offered a shopping list of everything that they asked for in the RFP. And I've put a cost associated with each thing on that list. The building committee has to authorize me to do anything on that shopping list. They've authorized me to review existing documentation and review anything that's been done in the past. So I can get helpful information to make informed decisions. So I've seen all the reports that have been done on the existing facility for air quality and hazardous abatement and hazardous surveys for hazardous materials associated with the existing building. So they've also authorized me to do that portion of the scope. They've authorized me to do the space needs assessment.
Is that assessment on the building?
Not the existing
Not
building.
Not the existing building.
No, they've asked to do a needs assessment for proposed building. They have not authorized me to do anything else down the list. Now, some things on the list, I've even indicated to the building committee, this is a shopping list. You might get to some of these items on the shopping list and say, it doesn't make any sense to do that, and you won't be charged for it. Such as, one of the things that was requested is put a plan together to renovate the existing building to meet the needs stated here.
Right, that's part of the RFP.
As part of the RFP, you
Yeah.
can be authorized to do that. There's a cost in my contract if you authorize me to do that. Or the building committee and the select board can say, we don't want to spend that money, we kind of know the answer. If you want me to do it, it's in the contract, but we haven't been authorized to do it.
Well, here's a question. Approximately 13,000 square feet. Could this facility even fit
No, that's what.
in that space?
No.
That's right.
And would we really want it to fit in that space?
You could spend money for me to try to see how it can work and would an addition have to be put on that building and then where would the parking go or you can just elect to say, I think we know the answer to this and it's a no. So don't spend any money on it.
That's what I was looking for.
And we haven't spent any money on it.
Hey, Dan,
Yes, Bob.
I have to agree with Dan and everything. I was hoping that this building could be reduced smaller, but listening to the reasoning, I have to support the 13,000. I just, maybe the only thing we could possibly do, maybe go to 2 cells instead of 3 cells. I don't know if there's ever been a time when we had to have 3 prisoners, but I mean, that's gonna be peanuts anyway, so. But I guess I support what you're saying, Brian, and thank you for doing that, so
Is the
I
building,
appreciate it.
is the building committee reviewed this, is this their recommendation?
Hi, Craig Wilbur, co-chair of the Public Safety Building Committee. We have discussed it. There are mixed feelings, but we all felt that what Brian had come up with was a comprehensive look at what the police station needs. Whether we can afford it or not wasn't our task. And therefore,
Yep.
at this point, the committee has looked at it, has initially endorsed it, and we did that at our February 10th meeting.
You voted on it?
We recommend to the select board that it be finalized. And
Okay.
At that point, it was, and then a discussion came up to have this meeting.
Have this meeting and dig in a little more so we could get the full context and background. It's been incredibly informative. Like I said, it came into this a month ago when we first looked at this. thinking, how can we make this smaller? Maybe there's still room for conversation there. I don't know. I don't want to be the loudest voice in the room by any means. I want to hear from everyone. But after hearing what you have said tonight, I could support this as the template, as what we're going to move forward with.
Yeah,
Tony.
Brian, thank you. That was incredibly informative, substantive. Thank you so much. I just want to point out a couple of figures here in terms of the site needs, summer, and Brian, these are excellent. Public parking is 12,000 square feet. Police vehicles and staff parking, 3,000 square feet. Fleet vehicles, carport, 2,600 plus square feet. Sally port, apron, 600. Storage outbuilding, for 600. Trash storage, 150. Emergency generator pad, 350. So a total of just over 19,000 square feet. That's on the outside of the building. And given the footprint of 13,350, that 20,000, let's say, and 13,000 takes us to 33,000 square feet at a minimum in terms of parking, pads, what have you. There's also a storage building, an outbuilding of an additional 1,800 square feet.
Yeah.
You have landscape setbacks and zoning setbacks and future expansion potential totaling almost that, 37,000 square feet. And I guess I approached this to you earlier. In terms of putting the puzzle together, this calls for a one-level building. But our committee looked at a dozen sites, and there's not a lot out there. And basically, my question is, if that one level could be a 2-level or 3-level in terms of reducing the footprint, that would make a decision, I think, to look at sites more palatable. Would that affect the cost significantly if instead of 1 level, you want 2 or 3 levels to accommodate what we have for parcels in the future?
Yes. The sites that would be given to me to evaluate are sites that the town has identified or the committee has identified as having the potential to support a police facility. Now, when I look at these sites, I'm looking and evaluating those sites to see if it has the potential to accommodate this description. This can be looked at as a generic document. It can be applied to the existing building, it can be applied to new construction, it can be applied to an addition renovation, but wherever you're trying to find the solution, these are the needs. That as a designer, I want to be providing for it in the entry zone. Well, if a site is looked at, and I evaluate a site that might not have the square footage to accommodate a single level facility, yes, I will evaluate that site on the potential for a 2-level facility. Certain aspects of this need to be on the ground level, but not all of them have to be on the ground level. Sally Port needs to be on the ground level. Prisoner processing, ground level. The detention area is ground level. Public accommodations, handicapped accessibility, preferred to be on accessible routes. And whether that accessible route is an elevator or stairs or ground level. We'll evaluate these sites on how it supports this. And it may require a 2-story solution. And I would give you that assessment when I give you the site assessment. That would be explained in that site evaluation phase, which is what we're looking to do next.
Just to follow up, Brian. Again, I had mentioned this when we visited the Williamstown Station. They have a minimum in terms of landscape or zoning setback. They built right to the edge. And so I know your proposal here calls for some 37,000 square feet, almost 3/4 of an acre setbacks. I'm just curious how that fits in as part of the puzzle. That's a large amount of land setback.
I'm putting this together for planning purposes. And if you see a site, you do need a certain amount of area around the building. And the area around the building could equal the square footage within the building. You're just looking how much of the site is the building going to take over? How much of the site do you need for parking? And then how much for setbacks, zoning requirements from side yard, front yard. For planning purposes, we use a number that is almost equal to the square footage of the building. That's planning purposes. Obviously, we'd have to look at any site, and I'm recommending a site of 1.65 to 2 acres. If you don't have that, it doesn't mean that site's not viable. But it may not be a one-story solution. We may have to look at setbacks. We may have to look at what is in the vicinity of that site. Is there any shared parking that could be done between that site and an adjacent site if it's municipal owned? What do you have for on-street parking to support this need? So we're gonna look at all of those components only when I'm asked to look at those sites. I have not looked at sites yet.
Mr. Davis?
All right, thank you very much. Just a couple of questions. We spoke a little bit about evidence room, 1, 2. Can you make this proposal, evidence room number 3 with the fentanyl, different areas to store things, so no drug contamination get on things, different for gold, different for guns, different for money?
We have, for accreditation requirements, it's locked evidence and double locked evidence. You can, the way I've designed it here is the double locked evidence can handle firearms, narcotics, and valuables. That double locked room is typically ventilated to a different level than the primary evidence storage. It's ventilated because that's where narcotics would get stored. But we don't want to recirculate the air out of that double locked evidence area, because then we would be recirculating and resupplying air that could be contaminated with narcotics.
And just to, I fully support your study, it's a great thing. We've all took a lot of time on looking at other facilities. The first question I asked them, what don't you like about the facility that you built? And then they would come back and tell us the facility was too small, it's a sheet rock wall or this, that, the other thing. But anyways, if you could rate our current police department on a scale from 1 to 10, that'd be great. Where would you put us?
Yeah,
Probably out there, I don't know.
I've seen worse, so I guess I'd give it a 2. I've seen worse. I have seen worse.
How many facilities that were in the process of being expanded because of the state changing their accreditation, code changing in your time of 20, 30 years doing this as it came out in the process of? Because I don't think they're making this go any smaller these days.
No, and these are unfunded mandates too, that the department has to comply with. They're unfunded mandates that they're doing the best they can. They really are. It's surprising that they're doing it with the morale and that they have, and they're coming to work every day and they're doing things that a lot of us would not volunteer to do. And they're doing it the best they can. It's not what they should be working in, and not in those conditions. Should not.
All right, well, thank you very much for that great report. And, please.
Yeah, Mark, Mr. Stroud, did you have any questions?
No, I'm answering.
Okay. Wanted to hear, Mr. Collins has some more, and then I wanted to hear from the chief as well. And if there's, I believe, Mr. Rose wanted to speak as well. Go ahead.
One of my questions, I see like some of your notes through here. You made notes of accreditation, regionalization. Is this building set up and designed for a regionalization process, like as it sort of sits? Because I mean, I feel that regionalization is a very important part of this building getting built. Trying to come up with a regionalized plan where environmental bond bill money could possibly be getting that could pay a large portion of this. What bonds and what grants that the town can get are going to be minimal compared to a 11 to $15 million building. Mm-hmm. So regionalization is really where this could be at? Is this building set up for that?
I would say yes.
Okay,
On page 4, the current sworn population for the Dalton Police Department right now is 13. In the year 2000, it was 16. So in the last 20 years, there's been a decline of 3 in the sworn contingents. For 2024 at 13, we're projecting out 2045 to accommodate 22. That 22 is broken out in categories of where we see the increase, potential for increase. And we see the potential for increasing the patrol officers from 7 to 12. That could be a regional result.
okay,
Because if you're taking a regional approach for policing, you're typically taking on different patrol areas in that regionalization, not taking on additional administration.
right,
So you would need lockers in the locker room. You would need additional space for patrol officers and patrol vehicles. And that would support a regionalized effort for departments. But this is not to be looked, this is a space needs assessment. This is not a management study. This is not something that's promoting regionalization, but it's attempting to accommodate it if and when it happens.
right.
Right sizing, as you say.
Or to find out that we didn't provide enough lockers in the locker room. Now what do we do? It's not something that we just add on like a classroom, as I
Right.
said earlier. It wants to be built in. Whether you provide those additional lockers today, you can always have future locker space, but it wants to be in the locker room.
Right.
Chief, did you want to make any comments?
Yes, please. I will not bore anybody with our stories of how horrific our work conditions are, but they're horrific. They're really horrific, like mold, water damage, rodents. That's my favorite, actually, sharing an office with a rat. The guys my wall often, not the greatest work conditions. We have no people in half of our building, including my office. I have to wear a winter coat and use a space heater. So the work conditions are not great. But that side, I think everybody here knows that. Regionalization has been a topic of conversation since the beginning. While I love the idea of regionalization, you have to have the buy-in from your surrounding communities. We do not. Our surrounding communities are not interested in regionalization. It is not an option. I so greatly appreciate the work everyone has put in with this committee, but we spend a lot of time discussing regionalization. It jeopardizes our relationships with our surrounding communities because they keep hearing this and they feel like we're trying to take them over. We are not. They do not want to regionalize right now. They want to remain their independence, which I completely and totally understand. So I just want to be very, very clear when I say this is not an option right now. No one around us wants to do this. So to keep talking about it and seeking funding for it, it's just not on the table right now. So I just want to be very clear so everyone has a clear understanding. And I mean, I've had conversations with our bordering towns and I know where they stand on this. So, and I know conversations have been had and I don't think anyone's going to say differently than what I'm telling you all. I greatly appreciate the work of our building committee. And Brian, fantastic presentation. It was very informative. It is, I think some people think that, and I don't want to say this in a way that comes off not appreciative, but I want people to understand the dire position we're working in. The restrictions and the demands placed upon the police departments now and how we have to do our job and the laws and the rules and the procedures. We just spent 14 months updating our policies. It took us 14 months to get through just to ensure that we're engaging in best practice work. Our policies, we can't even follow some of our policies because of our building. So we are in jeopardy of violating our own rules, regulations, and policies specifically to the cells And we are going to start tours now, so people can come in and take a look. We're gonna start doing one weeknight and one afternoon, maybe on Saturday. We're gonna start putting that out on the website, because seeing is believing. When we can't even follow our cell policy, we have no plumbing in our cells, there's no ability to put plumbing in our cells. They're half the size that they're supposed to be. One point of clarification, because I know the question comes up repeatedly, well, do we have to have cells? Yes, by population, you have to have cells, so that's not an option. And it's based on population of your community. So, and I can tell you, in my 27 years here, we have had multiple arrests many, many times with bipolar. So yes, we need more than one cell. Our current cells, listen, I am all for people being treated kindly, respectfully, humanely. Our cells are none of those things. They are literally, I can do this. They're that big. They have a rubber mattress on the floor, no bed structure, no plumbing, no water, no ventilation whatsoever. It's a rattle trap of a fan that makes a horrible noise. It goes to nowhere. It's this much space above the ceiling and it just goes to nowhere. So when I tell you they're horrific, we fail every year our inspections. They were built in 1976. The new laws and regulations came into play in 1987. So we're grandfathered for some of those things, and it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it right to put people in those cells. And, you know, people are like, oh, well, how many people do this? We just had someone in the cell within the last 6 days. And Sergeant Jerry got there, literally had to sit there and stare at the person because the conditions are so poor. We don't like to take our eyes off anybody in the cell. It's a liability to the town, and we take that extremely seriously. So I'm happy to answer questions for any of the conditions, but I don't want to take up any more time. I appreciate everyone coming here to learn and hear and listen and hopefully support this process, because we really need our help from our community. Without your help, we're going to be stuck in this situation, and it's just, I'm afraid we're going to lose our really good officers. You know, they're wonderful and they're very patient, but I can't expect them to work in these conditions forever. So, but I appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Chief. Any questions?
Yeah, can you explain why other towns don't want to have any form of regionalization when it can help save cost in towns?
Because they want to remain independent. They want to have their own police officers, their own police department, their own rules, regulations, and equipment. You know, I helped Tom write the grant several years ago for the regionalization. It was about a $25,000 grant we got through the state to explore regionalization. We did that process with Hinsdale and went through the process, and it was an overwhelmingly, they did not want to regionalize. They wanted to keep their own independence, and I understand that. I would want to.
But like in some of the, I mean, from what I've read, and you can tell me I'm wrong. I'm okay with that. I didn't even. Aren't some of the regionalization outlooks more of a cooperation than a conglomeration? And can't we, for instance, as he pointed out, the 40-person meeting and training room? Can't
Do I
that?
think regionalization is great thing? Yes. I think that if we can take two communities and pool our resources and provide the best services that we can, yes, I think it's a great idea. But I can't make them see it that way.
No, but I mean, just as something as simple as having a joint educational room, that can be classified as a regionalization format. I don't understand why other towns wouldn't sign on board to use a brand new facility training spot that would help us be able to build this with.
They sign on for little pieces like that.
But that's all we need.
Right, but someone needs to take the initiative to do that. And I think it's inappropriate for me to do it, but I'm happy to sit down and meet with anyone who wants to, and as a group, we can collaborate and do that. You know, a training center, Brian and I talked a lot about the training center. And we, excuse me, yeah, all of us, of course, right? In a tiny, tiny little space for training. Excuse me. I'm gonna choke to death. So many people.
And you joke her up.
But I never leave home without that water. So yes, I mean, I would love to see us regionalize. We just can't force ourselves upon other people in other communities.
this space needs assessment and what is presented here gives us an opportunity to explore that in the future.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean that we're going to have all the answers in terms of what that'll look like right now. We can't possibly have that, but this positions us to be able to do that if that's something that we, as the town of Dalton and other towns, desire. Even some of those simple shared, simpler things.
That may be the tiniest little piece that we need to qualify.
I think that's, like, if we could do a regionalized training room and a weight room, for instance, I was gonna ask, how many people in your 275 square foot, does that, would that allow you to go to Hinsdale or
We
Windsor
know we would share with our fire department.
Fire Department?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
we
but
talk
I'm-
about that often.
But I mean, that's part of, that's what I wasn't trying to say we had to regionalize it. I was thinking more of a cooperation program where, hey, you can come use our weight facility, you can come use our training
And
facility.
I think that may qualify enough. And I mean, anything is worth a shot, because like I said, I very much appreciate the outside box thinking on this. Because let's face it, I'm a taxpayer, just like you guys are, and I get it. So, and
Oh, keep going.
No,
I was just acknowledging. Mr. Davis?
Yeah, I think, I think regionalization that eventually is gonna have coming. But I think maybe Brian can enlighten or somebody else, but I think we've looked at regionalization. It's kind of like a school committee. You're gonna actually regionalize. That's why we use the term hybrid regionalization. If you're gonna regionalize, it might be its own entity. It might not be the town of Dallas Police Department or the town of Chatham's Police Department anymore. It's gonna be a police department, and we'll be in the same boat as we are with a fire district. So we gotta be really careful, and we should really start looking into things just a little bit clearer before we start pushing for it.
I'm just trying to find avenues. I'm just trying to find avenues for regionalization that are simple points that would allow us to go after the environmental bond bill.
We're gonna do a dispatch, all right?
Yeah, it's not enough. It's,
Well, we've got dispatch. I mean, we could also, with 3 detention cells, we could also take overflow from any town as
Yeah,
well, potentially.
it's simple.
I think to Brian, our committee, we kind of talked to just about everything to make it as small as possible, but have some regionalization happen.
Potential, yeah.
They've done a tremendous job.
I think from my experience, the regionalization efforts a lot of times fall short because everybody likes the concept as long as it's in their town. We're Yankees. We want every day in our community. And I touched on the topic of what they call dark stations. Communities, if they have a police department within their facility, they don't want a dark station at night, meaning no one's there. They feel they're paying for a service that they want somebody to at least be there at that department. So having it in your community, you can talk about attracting other communities. But where the other communities hesitate is that dark station concept and having that department leave their community to go to another community. So I've been part of a lot of conversations about regionalization, and they all raise their hands saying, it's a great idea, come to our town. And when it's not in your town, that's where the conversation becomes harder. And yes, regionalization is encouraged. It's happening in some communities. And sometimes it takes something to make that happen, whether it's an event or financial need. There's something that will eventually force that to happen. But that's the resistance that the chief is talking about. It's about they have a department. Why do they want to just turn the lights off and move to another town?
but that's what I'm saying. That's not part, it doesn't have to be like that.
You're right, and that's that hybrid that you can offer services, and you're doing it through your dispatch. Yeah. But offer it so they can come to your community and gain those services.
And,
Bob? Yes.
yeah, this regionalization thing, in the future, maybe be the way to go. But we gotta be very, very careful, because usually we don't do our homework, it's gonna cost us money. And I would not wanna see the town of Dalton have to pay more money to support other communities. And that's all I have to say.
Okay, I believe Mr. Rose had indicated interest at the beginning of the meeting to speak on this topic.
Center Road is North Mountain Road. Shouldn't attempt to regionalize happen before they build the building so that parts of the building would be shared? And I need to ask, who is involved with those negotiations to try to make regionalization happen? And isn't it worth one more attempt at that before we put down this enormous amount of money?
I mean, that's a great question. I think part of that answer lies in the fact that we did study this. We commissioned a regionalization study. We had a grant. And there is a report available with findings. And I believe that Hinsdale really was not in support of regionalization. This is the Dalton Hinsdale regionalization study. Could we broaden that to look at other towns? Potentially. The problem is there's a very real and pressing need to relocate or build a new facility for the police department today. I don't know that we have the time to back burner or put the need to build a facility on hold while we explore regionalization. I feel like we're in a little bit of a catch-22. I'd love to spend more time on that so that we could access more funding to make this more affordable. It is a lot of money, obviously. But I don't know that we may not have that much time, in my opinion, but happy to hear others. So Joe, we've got Joe Diver on Zoom. He raised his hand, but Joe, I'll get to you in a second. And Henry, do you have to follow?
Can I ask who were the specific individuals in those delegate negotiations? Because this is something that should be looked at carefully. Who are the specific people who attempted to do that? Not just who had a $25,000 study.
Members of the select board, the chief of police, the town manager, the consultants, as well as obviously their respective counterparts in Hinsdale.
So you've got a room where the select board with the select
Not everyone,
board-
no, not everyone at once, no.
Should that be done?
Potentially, but again, the clock is ticking on getting
There
a
was
facility built.
there was a meeting at Mastercliffs with the residents of Hinsdale, and they were overwhelmed and said no.
Residents.
Yes.
I mean, those are the ones who would make the decision at the end of the day. I mean, like this chief said, you can't force that cooperation. I feel like, could we look at it again? Yes, I'm not saying the door is closed, but we have to take action sooner rather than later. Mr. Diver, do you want to?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Just add a couple of comments here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. This regionalization grant was in 2022, and Hinsdale certainly was still licking in wounds from the CBRSD new Wacona High School build. And I think we all know the history there. And but the residents of Hinsdale were overwhelmingly opposed to a regional police station. I think Brian's excellent presentation here lends itself to growth down the road. The one thing I would recommend to the board is that regionalization is in the view, or is in the future, to put some financial requirement to those towns to participate to offset our initial cost of this police station. If it's $11 to $15 million, some structure that the board puts into play, that there's an expectation to buy in for that regionalization, especially if we're flipping the bill. But certainly regionalization was well studied. I was engaged when I was on board, certainly so many others, and I was overwhelmingly opposed by Hinsdale. So I would not go down that road at this time, because number one priority is our police officers' safety, health, and wellness. And we're at risk of probably some future medical liability claims of the current conditions of that workplace. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Diver. Any more comments, Mr. Rose?
Is accreditation important?
I believe so, yes. I believe that it will strengthen our department and our ability to provide the level of service that the town needs, as well as provide it in a way that is universally accepted within the state to a certain guidelines and standards. I think, why wouldn't anyone want that?
Because of the cost.
I understand. So it's we have to weigh that. We have to eventually put it before voters to make a decision. I think what we're here to do tonight, ultimately, is do we approve this space needs study to proceed to the next step? Or do we kick it back to the committee to revise the footprint and see where we could shave the square footage down? I think that's probably where I'm seeing this going right now. Members of the board? Did you say Joe? Okay. I'll get to Mr. Dibber in a minute. Mark? Robert?
I mean,
Bob?
I feel that, the space needs assessment. He's given us what we need. He's answered in a roundabout way. He's done his RFP. He's done his 2 questions. They don't feel that the building is capable of being upgraded to a standard that our police force can work in, nor can the town hall expand to what they need. I believe this assessment is exactly what we were looking for, and I think we have to move forward with the fact that he's telling us this is, quote, a regionalized and accredited program. So I would move that we let him take the next step with the properties.
Second.
Okay. So you moved. I want more clarity on that motion.
Yeah.
We're in discussion at the moment. I'd say we specifically want to authorize or approve the space needs assessment.
That was my given was.
Yeah.
Yep.
So what I'll do is just amend your motion. I move that we amend the motion to approve the space needs assessment
As written.
as presented. So,
Second.
okay, Bob seconds that. So what we need to do now, we can discuss that. We need to take a vote on the motion as amended, or rather on the amendment first, then the motion as amended. So any discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the amendment passes. Now we take a vote on the motion as amended. Any discussion? Hearing none, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed, motion carries. Mr. Stroud abstaining. Okay,
If I might, I have one question.
sure, we can certainly take another question.
Is there a site that could accommodate a fire district potential, because you know that's coming?
I don't have the answer to that question at this time. I do not know that. That would be nice.
Consider.
Actually, there is one site. It's right behind us.
And that is one of the 4 sites we are.
And it's town-owned, so
Would that accommodate both someday?
certainly I would imagine.
When is the next building committee meeting?
Wednesday.
So Rose, I would encourage you for Wednesday, the building committee.
To attend that meeting as well. Again, do I want to spend $15 million up, potentially? That's a question that the town's voters will need to answer once we have actual costs and designs and sites. But overall, I'm in support of the needs assessment as presented. And so let's work towards making that a reality. That's where I stand on it. Was there another question from one of the Zoom participants? Go ahead, ask her. Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Collins first, and I'll come back to you.
So just because it's a need, the chief is, necessity. We've said we need an air station. From your 30 years of experience, with the process that we still have left to go through with your design and the lots, based on your experience, what is the earliest you could see construction started on a project like this?
A year from now.
All in.
Construction start?
Yeah.
Probably take, for us to complete our tasks and get you everything that would include a professional cost estimate,
Yep.
we would still need another couple months. You would then have to organize an effort for public information and organize some approval of funds
Okay.
to go forward. So there's timing for that.
Yeah.
And then to put together a bid-ready set of documents is about 6 months' effort for architects and engineers to get this prepared for a public bid.
That's best case scenario, a
Yes.
year from now. Okay.
So I just, in my head,
Yeah.
added the months, and
Yep.
so a spring start would probably be your earliest effort,
Alright.
allowing 6 months for a design effort before construction, and a bid period where you have to receive competitive bids. A couple months for that.
I'll come to you next. There was two here, Mr. Rose and Mr. Pagliarulo.
Brian, do you have expertise in green building construction, specifically heating systems? And how much will that cost up front? But how much might that save us in the long run as the price of natural gas goes through?
It's a conversation that comes up with every project we do, and we can assist with that once we know a design. We do have to design the current energy codes. So you will be getting an energy efficient facility just to meet code requirements. But yes, there are other initiatives that you can look at for sustainability, whether that's solar or geothermal. They all increase first cost, and then you have to look at a life cycle payback over time to see if that's something that the site would support, and the funding would support.
Does your firm have expertise in that?
We do. We have done facilities with geothermal heating and cooling systems. The municipalities where those were installed, supported that concept and supported the costs.
Mr. Pagliarulo.
Yeah, just one last thing. I know regionalization's been bandied around, but there's really two sides to that, and I hope we don't close the door to one side. The one side that I'd like to see opened is the state. They're certainly keen on regionalization, and there's monies to be had. But I understand that we're going to have to go forward in terms of our police station, whether we have a hybrid or contracted services. I would just, and I'm going to make this recommendation Wednesday, it's already on my agenda, is that we ask our sister communities how they feel about this through the selective formal process. Even if it's a memorandum of understanding that they may consider it in the future, that would give us leverage at the state level to say, can we ask for additional monies or grants, given that the future is going to require these communities to join on? And I say that because Clarksburg is a perfect example. They've lost their police chief. They looked to North Adams for services. North Adams said it'll be $300,000, and Clarksburg said no. And so now they use the state police. And it's my understanding, if the chief has told me correctly, and I believe she has, there's only 2 state police officers on the evening, all of Berkshire County. So, Northern Berkshire, excuse me, thank you, John. So, again, I don't want to close that door, but I would ask this select board to have a discussion, and if they simply close the door, that's fine, but possibly some may say, well, there's a memorandum of understanding that we look forward to that in the future. That would provide us with leverage at the state level to secure additional funding.
That is a great point. I don't want to close the door either, just because of our past experience. I think there's opportunity. We can continue to explore it, potentially with a vote at the select board level, support, a memorandum to the neighboring select boards, saying that we'd, like to look into this again or find ways we can cooperate, maybe have a joint meeting or something along those lines, but or get informal support, at the very least. Mr. Irwin, well, we had a comment over here first.
Gigi from 191 Avenue. Just kind of a process question. At what point does the town vote on this? Is this something that will be brought up in town meeting in April? Is it that meeting, or is this can be a special kind of meeting? How does that work in terms of?
Yeah.
what's the-
That's a very good question. It all depends on if we have enough firm plan with true costs identified that we can present in time for this May. I don't know that we'll be ready for that, but
I think timing wise, you'd probably look at a special something.
we would potentially, if we wanted to, let's say, meet construction timeline in 1 year, for example, break ground next spring, then we definitely would need a special town meeting. I'd say there's no question about that. Is this the best way to approach building, making such a large investment to have a special town meeting? There's opinions on each side of that as well. But I feel like there'd be a huge turnout for this, regardless whether it's a regular May all-town meeting or special. But I would love to see the funding come before town voters this year. Yeah.
So I don't want to continue this, but I do want to respond to that as well. We did ask Brian to hold based on his meeting tonight.
Yes.
We have lost several weeks, and I would ask that the committee or the select board consider that as we start to prepare our report. Brian's report is due at the end of April,
Okay.
very close to the town
Yes.
meeting, and so we would ask for your understanding if that was not possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fact that we just took a vote to support the space needs assessment as presented, I think is a huge step in moving this forward. And I think everyone was waiting for at least this moment. So, thank you. Let's see, Mr. Irwin.
When you generate your letter of understanding, we need this time around the fact that the training room is set up for 40 people. And that we do have the gym. We have other features that can be the basis for some reconsideration. It's not just like vanilla reconsideration. And I think that the fact that we're offering to share that would be greater impetus for them to consider this. Because otherwise they'd be thinking, well, are we closing something now? No, this is evidence of the fact that we're truly trying to acquire.
Yeah.
Joe.
Mr. Diver? I'm gonna,
Thank you, Dan. Just on the comment, I'm a little disappointed tonight. I've heard more about regionalization than I have about police officer safety. And through you and the chair, I encourage the building committee to put that as the primary focus of our officer safety. We have OSHA reports. We have other reports that are talking about the lack of safety. We heard it from the chief tonight. But I have not heard from any leadership on the select board or the building committee about our police officer safety. Regionalization with the other towns should be secondary, but plan for in the future. I urge the building committee to move forward with the plans and to get this process going for the safety of our officers. Thanks, Dan.
thank you for your comments. I would like to, in the interest of time, try to wrap this up.
I think we can save 6.
I think we kind of combined 5 and 6 already. So the 6th item on our agenda was discussion of regionalization of police, and I feel like that discussion happened within the context of agenda number 5. And again, this is not so much a formal public hearing by any means. It was more of an informational session for the select board to feel comfortable moving forward, at least with this plan. I would say stay tuned for future agenda items discussing that. But to Mr. Diver's comments, officer safety and well-being, certainly a new facility will solve for that in a big way. But with the current facility, there are capital improvements that will come before the town voters at the annual town meeting in May, including HVAC and plumbing, to make that current space better and, to get us through to the next one. But that's about all I have to say for that.
It's on the motion to table another 6.
Okay, so moved. You need a second on that?
Second.
Okay.
That's a dirty
No vote, I don't think vote's required. Last item on the agenda, items not anticipated 48 hours before meeting. Mr. Hutchison? Where did he?
He disclosed.
I thought he said July.
What do you do, retire already?
Now, actually, whatsoever.
Let's talk about the next.
Items not consistent, 48 hours, just so you know. Okay, no.
I've been
Send it
asked
to me
to,
about, okay.
watch a rumor, which is in fact a rumor. I don't know how far it might have spread or to whom, but, there were some rumors that, Mr. Diller, was, involved in the, application of our new executive assistant, and that is absolutely untrue. She saw the item in the newspaper and was looking for a position and applied based on that. So, always nice to be able to quell a rumor because there's so many of them. And this one, we can nail and say it's false.
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Second. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Thank you all very much.